Hello, dear viewers. Today's story is a rollercoaster ride through the tangled webs of love and betrayal. I'm Jason, your storyteller, and we're about to go on a ride. Grab a seat, fasten your seatbelts, and here we go. It was all an illusion. It was all fantasy. In short, it was nothing but a dream. Unfortunately, it took me 4 years to wake up. Then I realized that it was all a nightmare. I was a weird kid at the end of the lane. I was the kid who ate his lunch at the table next to the dumpster. I was the kid taped to the flagpole. Yeah, I was that kid. It was easy to understand why. I never had a father. I mean, obviously there was a sperm donor somewhere, although my mother denies it. To her, men are evil. She's tried for years to rend the evil from my soul and my body. So, I spent grammar school in pedal pushers and frilly blouses to avoid toxic masculinity. Basically, I spent my childhood with a target on my back. My mother was a religious fanatic. She tried every religion out there, from Catholicism, my grandparents' faith, to Pentecostal, but none of them were stringent enough for her. She eventually began her own cult, a twisted blend of serpent handling, the holiness movement and second works of grace, alternatively called second blessings. Overlaying all that was her own brand of feminism. The funny thing was that I later learned that my mother only knew those terms, and never really understood what they represented or meant, not even feminism. She just made up her own meanings for everything. Yes, to my mother, feminism equaled lesbianism equaled righteousness. My house was always filled with fat, slovenly women accompanied either by a sapphic partner or by a pale, skinny, totally dominated husband. That was my mother's congregation. Her followers were mostly women who embraced her hatred of masculinity. I found out later that one of their beliefs was that the male beast could only be tamed by voluntary castration. I became religious myself when I learned that tenet of my mother's beliefs. You would have become religious too, were you in my position. I thank God daily for that voluntary part of the tenet. I'm sure my mother would have removed my seeds of temptation, as her doctrine referred to tastes, when I was a child, had she not thought that God had included the voluntary clause to that tenet. As it was, my mother made many different offers throughout my childhood, promising great gifts if I would just agree to a small operation. I was terrified of doctors as a child and never would agree, although that pony was sorely tempting when I was 9. As it was, my own Reverend Mother preached at me constantly to embrace God and submit my sacrifice at His altar. My refusal led my mother to put me on enforced fasts and nights spent on my knees, while I was supposed to pray for God's gift of enlightenment. All this blended into the misery that was my childhood, and it never occurred to me that mine was unusual, outside of the clothing my mother forced on me. I thought everyone spent hours fasting and praying. I remember having friends in kindergarten, at least once I began going. My mother tried to avoid sending me to the den of evil that for her was public school. The school district made her send me to school when they found out from a worried neighbor that I existed. I'd missed the first half of the school year, so once they sent me, I was already the stranger. Everyone else was already over their initial shyness, so I was alone at being the scared newcomer. Plus, I had never been around another child because my mother had kept me secluded. I'd never had a playmate, other than the ones I made up in my head. And they were nothing like these kindergarten kids. But eventually classmates reached out and I learned the joys of companionship. That lasted through kindergarten, while our school hours were different from the other grades. We came later and left earlier, and our playground times were separate from the bigger kids, so we were sheltered from them. That ended the first day of first grade. Once the bigger kids saw me, the never-ending ridicule began. It was never to end. And it cemented my existence as a pariah. The problem was my mother's efforts to save me from the evils of masculinity. She put my hair, which she refused to cut, into curls that Shirley Temple would have been proud of. And while she didn't put me in dresses, my clothes were the frilliest and most feminine she could find. She never bought me jeans. Instead, I was dressed in capri pants or pedal pushers. I remember thinking that all pants had a zipper on the side. My shirts were girls' blouses, all in pinks and pastels. My undergarments. Let's just say that I was well into high school before the question of boxers or briefs had an opportunity to arise. The school recognized that this was not the best look for me, and requested social services take up my case. Mrs. Ormark was my caseworker. She was also a deacon of my mother's church. The school was told to mind their own business, that my outfits were part of my mother's religious freedom. No one at the school cared enough to challenge that, and soon everyone became used to the little freaky gay kid. I didn't know what gay was until I reached puberty, and it became obvious that I wasn't, much to my mother's consternation and horror. By high school I was able to avoid wearing the frilliest of the clothes my mother bought for me, when I was able to scrounge or earn enough money to purchase jeans and t-shirts from the local thrift store. The kind woman at the Salvation Army store took pity on me and let me buy enough clothes to get me through a week without wearing any dirty ones. I repaid her kindness by donating all the clothes I would no longer be wearing to the army for her to sell. My mother made me kneel, pray, and fast the entire weekend when she found out, but she didn't replace the clothing. I was allowed to dress in the second-hand clothes that I'd purchased. The evil manly clothing. But it was too late to help. After years of being shunned, now I couldn't blend in or make friends. I was a weird kid with cooties in elementary school, and the freaky gay weirdo in high school, who was shunned even by the real gay students. By then I'd stopped trying. The humiliation was too great. I wasn't even allowed to partner in class after the Shauna debacle. That was the first day of freshman year physical science. Shauna and I were paired as lab partners, over her loud and stringent objections. I think, not with the freak was her kindest comment that day. Then when we went to her lab station, I saw that her stool was dusty and thought to brush it off with my hand, unfortunately right when she decided to sit down. My hand and her ass met. Although it was the back of my hand that touched her butt, she jumped up and was very loud and vocal about my attempt to grab her behind, as she phrased it, repeatedly. She would remain vocal about what a pervert I was for the next 3 years, until I left that school, solidifying in everyone's mind that I was a pervert. My mother's church, with her now infamous castration revelations, as her sermons were known, didn't help me overcome that image. Parents of my classmates demanded that their children not be forced to associate with me. So, no lab partners, no study buddies, no team sports of any kind, no gym class. Throughout high school, I sat alone, worked alone, existed alone. In fact, my only contact with my classmates was when they bullied me, which was pretty much daily. The one thing that the Salvation Army didn't sell was undergarments, so not knowing that commando was an option, I still wore the undergarments that dear old mom purchased for me. I never knew that boys wore anything different, since I was never included in gym. I never even saw the inside of the locker room in high school. Deprived at home of that godless tool of Satan, the television, I never even got to see a Hanes underwear commercial. It was unfortunate that one pair of jeans I had purchased was several inches too big in the waist. I kept it cinched up with a belt, but it was still baggy and loose. One day when my books were knocked out of my grasp, an almost hourly occurrence, and I squatted down to retrieve them, Timmy Shaw, one of my chief bullies, noticed the purple nylon panties peeking out from above my jeans. He joyously pointed it out to the bigger kids. Timmy was on the smallish side and took special joy in tormenting me, I think because he realized that if I hadn't been there, he would have been lowest on the totem pole. It only took a few seconds for the seniors he alerted to pull my pants down to my ankles, exposing the dark purple panties. I was surrounded by laughing classmates pointing at me, pulling out their cell phones, and shouting for their friends to come and see. When I tried to pull up my pants, a senior punched me in the gut, knocking the air from my lungs. I ended up lying on the ground in the fetal position, until Mr. Garland, the math teacher, chased everyone to class and helped me to the nurse's office to be checked out. It might have seemed kind of Mr. Garland had he not chuckled as he helped me pull up my trousers. "That's a nice color for you," he had to comment about my purple panties. I cut school for the next 3 days, leaving the house in the morning, and wandering through the woods until school was out. The truant officer showed up the afternoon of that third day, and warned my mother that there would be consequences unless I returned to school the next day. Since my mother had repeatedly attempted keeping me home from school over the years, she knew that she could be fined or given community service hours if I continued my truancy. Plus, she feared the loss of the welfare benefits she was collecting. So, after a night on my knees, I returned to school. My mother followed me to ensure that I went. It was then that I discovered a rare act of kindness had been perpetrated. Inside my locker I found 2 six-packs of white jockey shorts, with a note that said, "This is what boys wear." The note wasn't signed, but at least I knew that someone was being kind to the freak. I went straight to a toilet stall and changed out of the lime green panties I had on. That night, all the panties hit the trash. My neighbor's trash. I didn't want to risk my mother finding them in our can. School was still hell, as was the rest of my life, but at least my bullies suffered some disappointment when they pantsed me only to see those tidy whities. Of course, their disappointment didn't last long. They just added my jockey shorts to the pile of clothes around my ankles. Another glorious day of education for Habakkuk Mason. Oh yeah, that name never helped much either. Habakkuk. Only my mother would think to name the child after that minor prophet. From kindergarten on, I had to explain the name. And I had to explain it the way my mother wanted, or she would come to class to explain it for me. I sometimes wondered why I never considered suicide. Habakkuk was a Judean prophet who wondered why God would punish the degenerate people of Judea for their wicked way with a people even more evil, the Babylonians. God explained to Habakkuk that he would ultimately punish the Babylonians and free the chosen people once they repented their wicked ways and returned to righteousness. It was bad enough having to explain that bit to teachers. I tried to limit the explanation of my name to just that, as related in the book of Habakkuk, but somehow my mother would find out and show up to explain the true meaning and purpose of my name. Men, you see, my mother would explain, were the embodiment of the evil Babylonians, whom God was using to punish his chosen people, who according to her beliefs, were women. The female people had been seduced in the garden by the snake, who of course represented the male peen, leading them into degenerate behavior with the punishment of procreation, along with the curse of menstruation, pregnancy, and children. Menstruation, according to my mother, was named after men's truths. So, God was using the evil mankind to punish the actual children of God, womankind. Only when women rejected the snake would God render mankind asunder and reward the glorious, virtuous female species. That's how my mother explained my name. That's how she insisted I explain my name. My loving mother. I bet you no longer wonder at my rejection by my classmates. Things got better towards the end of my junior year. Mrs. Ormark, my social services caseworker, was sent to jail. Apparently, there was some misunderstanding where Mrs. Ormark really thought that her husband had finally volunteered to embrace the Lord and have his seeds of temptation removed. When he was awakened by his wife pulling down his shorts with a knife in her hand, he justifiably freaked out and called the police. His wife was raving about the will of God as they dragged her away. Mr. Ormark has since packed up and disappeared. As Mrs. Ormark was mom's deacon and she and her probably unwilling husband were the biggest financial supporters of her cult, my mother thought it was a real shame. She offered to testify at the deacon's trial, but somehow her lawyer didn't think it would be helpful. I noticed that for several weeks, the male husbands of my mother's other disciples looked very nervous and tired. I don't think any of them were sleeping soundly. Anyway, Mrs. Ormark was replaced by Mr. Jameson. After reviewing my file and talking with the school counselor, he insisted on weekly meetings. It took several weeks, but eventually he got me to open up about my life, my mother, and my loneliness. I think he was horrified. He did comment that it was a good thing that Mrs. Ormark was already committed to an institution, because her treatment of me was criminal. He thought about it, and after a visit to my mother, when he actually put the fear of God into my mother, threatening her with everything from prison to loss of welfare benefits, he began spending time with me. He was the first father figure in my life. He also introduced me to his brother, who was a lawyer. In the end, the brothers arranged for me to sue social services for the abuse that I had suffered throughout childhood. My case was based on the fact that their representatives successfully blocked every effort by the school to end my suffering. I won a high six-figure settlement. Mr. Jameson's brother represented me pro bono, so outside of expenses, the entire settlement was mine. It also gave me a love of the law, courtrooms, and the whole judicial system. That settlement allowed me to then file to be an emancipated minor. I was free. Mr. Jameson found me an apartment in his building and mentored me in all the things I needed to know. I had been cleaning and cooking for my mother my whole life, so I could easily handle those chores, but he helped with setting up bank accounts and financial investing with a licensed advisor to help. He taught me to drive and helped me find my first car. We shopped, and I now had a whole new wardrobe. Contact lenses and braces eventually relieved me of my crooked teeth and heavy glasses. But the first thing on my agenda after emancipation was a haircut. Mr. Jameson took me right from the courtroom to a barber shop. I cried watching my curls drop to the floor. The barber raised his hands and stepped back, asking if he had hurt me. No, I sobbed. I'm so happy. I'm so happy. After years of long hair, my short hair stuck straight out. We stopped at a drugstore and bought some hair gel and a hairdryer. Mr. Jameson showed me how much gel to use and how to shape the hair to go how I wanted it with the hairdryer. I didn't recognize the boy, no, the man, who looked back at me in the mirror. I think I stood straighter, maybe for the first time in my life. Mr. Jameson took me to sporting events. He introduced me to running in the gym. He enrolled me in a karate class, saying that a man must know how to defend himself, and besides, I needed something to get me out at night from in front of the television, to which I was quickly becoming addicted. It showed me a whole new world. A world where people can be happy. He also took me to the Catholic Church. He told me that I had a twisted idea about God, religion, and our relationship to both. He enrolled with me in CCD classes, Confraternity of Christian Doctrine, the religion classes for the Roman Church. He didn't need the classes, but wanted to be there to help me understand, providing context and explanations my upbringing might not provide. Or, more likely, that my childhood would make it hard for me to understand. Gradually, I was amazed at how loving and gentle Mr. Jameson's religion was. So different from my mother's hateful screeds. He also taught me to ride a bicycle. It was another joy that my mother had deprived me of. All in all, the second half of my senior year gave me a childhood I had never had. It was a period where I learned to be a man. Mr. Jameson, or Will as he eventually insisted that I call him, was a real godsend. It wasn't all fun and games. It wasn't always the most comfortable of discussions, but shortly after my 18th birthday, Mr. Jameson sat me down and answered questions that had puzzled me for years. I finally found out things that had confused me growing up in that public isolation I was trapped in. Mr. Jameson taught me how to be a man. Anyway, that was my childhood. Alone, shunned, bullied, and struggling to understand the masculinity that my mother struggled so hard to protect me from. Once I was emancipated, other problems became evident. I was tongue-tied around people. Even with Will, I had a hard time expressing myself, and I tended to stutter and lisp. Lisping especially kept me quiet. Imagine a guy in pedal pushers and a frilly blouse who lisps in high school. Not a pretty picture. To help me socialize and correct my speech, Will arranged for me to have a speech therapist. I'm not sure just what all he had arranged for, but it didn't take long for her to correct my speech problems. Being an amazingly beautiful woman also helped me to become more comfortable talking to women. It was wonderful. When our sessions continued even longer than I thought necessary, I didn't object. I was just happy to have more opportunities to look down on that wonderful cleavage. My last class was on my 18th birthday. Again, I'm not sure how much Will arranged for at the beginning of that class, Mona, the therapist, said, "We have to work on your linguistic skills." Then she stood, stripped, and led me to the couch. She introduced me to oral, both receiving and giving, and then to sex. As we laid back, sweaty and exhausted, she said that I was a natural. "You really are a linguist." The cunniling guessed. Alas, that was to be my last class. But it really set the bar high for graduation ceremonies. I never returned to my high school. In a brilliant move, Will got me into an elite private school for my senior year. It was his alma mater, and he pulled a lot of strings and called in favors to get me in. I was still shy, but I had a good build and a pleasant face, and my shyness was taken for the strong, silent type. Girls invited me on dates and to dances. Without having to say much, I had become, somehow, somewhat popular. I had friends, went to movies and parties, and took girls to dinner. Suddenly, I was now a normal teenager, albeit an emancipated one. It was a week before graduation when my mother reappeared in my life. Somehow, she found out where I was living, and when Will and I came home from a karate class, she came running across the street, knife raised over her head, screaming that God demanded my purification. I was frozen in fear. 18 years of my mother was difficult to escape. Will jumped in front of me, putting himself between me and the harridan running towards us. Was he risking his life for mine? That thought flashed through my paralyzed brain. But it wasn't to be. Mom ran out right in front of a speeding box truck. I swear I heard of a crunch when it struck her. And just like that, the main feminine influence in my life was gone. I had mixed emotions. My mother had never been a nurturing person, but she was my mother. I hated her, but I loved her. Why? Yes, she made my life miserable, but when I was sick or hurt, she nursed me and comforted me. People have told me that my mother was evil, but I don't think so. She was delusional and had twisted beliefs, but she believed, really did believe in them. I don't think she ever intentionally hurt anyone, although I know that she would have hurt me in the end. But I'm sure that somewhere, in her brain, she believed that God spoke to her and like Abraham on Mount Moriah, he had asked her to sacrifice her son. But beyond the demands of her God, she was always kind to the women in her church, helping many through abusive relationships or financial problems. She was even kind to men who were begging or needed help. All my life my mother was on welfare of some kind, but she never hesitated to share money or food with people she found needy. Yes, she made my life hell, but despite her beliefs, I think she loved me. Will insisted I see a therapist because I had witnessed my mother's violent death. I had one meeting with that doctor. She pointed out that it was telling that I had never shed a tear for my loss. She babbled on about edible urges and suppressed sexuality. She talked to my former school. She clearly thought I was gay, I think. The one thing that she said that rang true was that my primary feeling about my mother's death was, above all else, relief. I agreed, and never went back. Personally, I appreciated Mona's type of therapy more than the psychobabble. Will insisted that I go Ivy League for college, and again pulled strings to get me into his alma mater. I had an amazing 4 years, but most amazing of all were the women, culminating in the goddess Eva. Eva and I had met at a frat party in my junior year. By that time, I was fully acclimatized and socialized, largely thanks to Will's help and example. I was relatively popular, a star of the college chess club, on the cycling team, not as grand as being on one of the real sports teams, but it had a certain cash with some co-eds, and a member of one of the better fraternities. Yes, it was Will's frat. I was treated as his legacy. Academically, I was on track to graduate magna cum laude, if not summa cum laude. And my sex life was great. At least I thought so. But then, I met Eva Stokes. She was a year behind me and joined the chess club her junior year. She was a fair but uninspired player. Gradually, as we started dating, she admitted that she had joined the club with the sole aim of meeting me. Flattering, to say the least. But by the time of that confession, we were already exclusive. Sex with her was head and shoulders above the great sex I had had before. Yes, I know the joke about the guy with dandruff and the girl that said she cured it by giving him head and shoulders. Her friend then asked, "How do you give shoulders?" She was fantastic, enthusiastic, and multi-orgasmic. She'd wear me out every time. She described herself as a monogamous nymph. There were times after I had to tap out that she would resort to her rather large collection of toys. When I became aware that I couldn't fully meet her needs, we had a discussion, instigated by me, about sharing. I feared that I would lose her to her frustrations, that her sexual drive would lead her into infidelity. Her head popped up and she stared at me with panic in her eyes. "Are you suggesting that you would share me? Or are you breaking up with me?" She grabbed my hands. I was surprised by her question. It wasn't until I heard the words come out of my mouth that I realized that they were somewhat ambiguous. "No," I shook my head. "I don't want to do either. I don't think I could share. The thought of you with someone else tortures me. Just thinking of it makes me so angry that I could punch a hole in the wall with my frustration. And I don't want to break up with you, either. I know we haven't really said it, but," here I hesitated, "before taking that step, I love you. I want to marry you." Eva's eyes lit up and she started to reach for me. I stopped her. "I know that you are frustrated frequently by my inability to keep up with you," I continued. "More than anything, I want you to be happy, and I want to avoid being hurt even more than I would be by losing you now. But if you don't think that monogamy will work for you, then we should break up now. I don't think my heart could take it later." Tears ran down her face. "Please don't leave me. You're all I ever wanted. You're more than enough for me, and if I need more, then I have Ernie." Ernie was her favorite vibe. It was also her largest. Frankly, I had always found it kind of intimidating. "I want to marry you, too. That's my greatest wish. It's all I think about. I'm yours and only yours, forever." She pulled me to her, pressing her face into my chest. I heard her mutter, "I told you that I was a monogamous nymph." She looked up into my eyes. "Unless you mind, Ernie." "Of course not," I said. We fell into each other's arms, and eventually into bed. When she lay back, apparently sated for once, she asked if my proposal was accompanied by a ring. I wondered if saying I wanted to marry her constituted a proposal, and decided that even if it didn't, I would have wished that it did. We went ring shopping the next day and got married a week after my graduation. We set out on a honeymoon and were desperately in love. She'd even left Ernie at home, the rarity of which I hadn't yet learned. Our honeymoon was cut short when Will suddenly fell ill. Howard contacted me, advising me not to delay coming home. We rushed, even chartering a private plane, but arrived just hours too late. Will had passed away. Unlike my mother, I shed a flood of tears for Will. He had changed my life and was the source of all the good and joy in my life. To this day, I still miss him. He was truly my father, in every meaningful way. As a social worker, Will wasn't a rich man. He had a house he had inherited from his parents, for which he shared ownership with his brother Howard. He also had a well-funded 401k. His brother informed me that Will had named me his sole heir. I tried to give Howard my share of the house, saying that he should have it, since it was an inheritance from his folks. He refused my offer, saying that Will had viewed me as his son, and that he, Howard, viewed me as his nephew. We were family, and he hoped that I would live in the family home. Eva and I moved in once Will's trust was settled on me. After the bar exam, I took Eva on a month's vacation, to replace the honeymoon we'd missed out on. I rented a plush schooner, and we cruised through the South Pacific for a whole month. It was glorious. We made love under southern skies on secluded beaches, and on the deck of our schooner at anchor, while the crew slept. Ernie accompanied us on that trip, as he did on every trip after our original honeymoon. Eva needed to satisfy her needs, she explained. The crew were at first alarmed by and then amused by the sounds coming from our cabin while I was on deck. I thought, as long as Eva is happy, I wouldn't let it bother me. And she was. We were both happy. We returned tanned, fit, and wonderfully in love. Eva had a job lined up teaching at a community college. She'd had a choice between an elite private high school and the junior college. The high school job actually paid more, but Eva explained that she thought she would advance further at the college level. Also, she saw herself more as a college professor than a high school teacher. She planned to continue on to a PhD. I paid off all her student loans, as well as the cost of pursuing her master's. I could easily support her to a doctorate. I went to work for Will's brothers' firm, Jameson, Atkins, and Fisher. They practiced both commercial and criminal law. Ed Fisher mainly handled criminal cases, while Howard focused on the commercial side with Turns Atkins. They weren't a large firm, but were a well-respected one. It was a good fit, and I functioned as an associate for Ed during the 12 more weeks I still had to wait for the bar results. I couldn't legally work as a lawyer, but Ed felt comfortable having me work in the background on his cases. I really wanted the full Perry Mason experience and was disappointed that we didn't represent any murderers at the time. Most of our cases were simple assault cases, road rage, domestic fights, or common crimes, burglary, shoplifting, or auto thefts. Even more disappointing was how often they were settled by plea deals. It was months before I saw the inside of a courtroom. Ed explained the two things determined most cases. Was the client likely to be proven guilty and/or could the client afford to put up a courtroom fight? Even the cases the court demanded we take on pro bono tended to settle. You must understand. Most of our clients are guilty. They tend to be career criminals and are very realistic about their chances. They'd rather plead down, save the court's time, and serve a third or less of the sentence they would receive were they to go to court. So much for Perry Mason. Ed joked that I should have spent my childhood watching Let's Make a Deal. Let's hear it from Monty Hall and Wayne Brady. The joke went over my head at the time. Eva explained it to me later. While the law was turning into a disappointment, Eva started teaching and was in love with the experience. She'd come home every day, excited that the students seemed to appreciate her lectures. Her sex drive seemed to be even more heightened after she began teaching. I hadn't thought that possible. When I asked who was more appreciative, the men or the women, she gave me a strange look and asked why that mattered. When I said that they were probably more appreciative of her face and figure, she got angry and refused to let me touch her. That was our first fight, and the first time I slept on the couch. The next day I was able to convince her that I had been joking and never meant to denigrate her teaching skills or lectures. I learned how seriously she took her teaching and how much that the respect she thought was her due meant to her. I treaded carefully after that whenever we talked about her career. Ernie was becoming more of a presence in our bedroom. Eva tended to get home much earlier than me, and oftentimes when we went to bed, I could tell that Ernie had been in her earlier in the day. I assumed it was Ernie. Eva had never given me any reason to suspect her of infidelity. When the bar exam results were finally reported, I had passed. I had not only passed but was in the top 90 percentile, with a score of 320 on the UB. Howard, Ed, and Terry were all ecstatic. I was now full associate at the firm. Even though that made me one of 20, I was still overjoyed. I was congratulated by one and all on my high score, or so I thought. It took me some time to realize that I had lost someone I thought was a good friend. Robert Garcia and I had tended to eat lunch together and to be assigned the same cases. Outside of work, Gloria and Eva had become good friends, and the four of us often went out together. We made a good team, I thought, especially for people who hadn't yet passed the bar. Bobby had graduated law school the year before me, and while we both sat for the exam in July, it was my first time, but Bobby's third. He passed the bar this time, after failing twice. Even now he just squeaked by with a score of 265, only 5 points above the required 260. He showed up at the office elated that he passed, but seemed to sour when another associate told him my score. Suddenly, Bobby had other plans for lunch, and Gloria had other friends she needed to get reacquainted with. Eva felt the rejection as strongly as I did, and demanded to know what I had done to her friends. At the time, I didn't know, and when I approached Bobby, he first assured me that there was nothing wrong, then surly added, "Jesus, do we have to kiss you behind all the time?" He walked away, leaving me shocked and hurt by his statement. That's when another associate who had overheard the conversation told me how badly he had reacted to my success. "He's just jealous, man. You not only passed the bar the first time, but you've beaten all our scores. You're a star." When I told Eva what was going on, she didn't believe it. She didn't believe that Gloria would drop her just because her husband was jealous. For the next few months, she refused to read the writing on the wall, sending invitation after invitation to Gloria before finally giving up. She was heartbroken. Eva was from up north and hadn't known anyone in my hometown. Gloria had become her main confidant and friend. They were both in education, with Gloria teaching at a Christian high school. My wife was bereft and beyond comfort. Eventually, we made connections with people from the community college, but she was reluctant to associate with anyone from the law firm. I started to take my lunches alone. It reminded me of high school. I felt isolated, and ironically that made me self-isolate even more. Then I came in one day to find the other associates looking at me and snickering. That went on for a week. Then panties started appearing on my desk. I didn't know what to do. I started becoming tongue-tied when making presentations in front of giggling coworkers. Eva laughed at me when I started stuttering at home. Then when she saw my face, she gathered me in her arms and asked what was wrong. I told her what was happening at work, but she told me that they were all jealous of me, and I should ignore them. As the days passed and my verbal presentation failed more and more, Eva lost patience with me and told me to man up. That was the second night I slept on the couch. She apologized to me the next morning, but told me, "Really, Hack, this is a problem only you can solve. Just get out of your head and it'll all straighten out." It was obvious that she was losing respect for me, and that affected our sex life. She began belittling me during sex, and I would go soft, which only added fuel to her comments. She commented several times that Gloria and Bobby would have been able to keep her satisfied. They're both a lot more manly than you. Our relationship was sliding downhill fast. Belittled at work and at home. But it only grew worse. Eva started to pull out Ernie as soon as I went flaccid. After 2 months she started pulling it out and using it, instead of having sex with me. Watching her play alone would bring me to full mast, but she would just sneer at me and continue on with her plastic lover. My frustrations grew and my lisp returned to join my stutter. I miss Will. He would have helped me deal with these problems. Eventually, my stuttering began to compromise the cases I was working on. The clients were having trouble understanding me. My work products started disappearing as well, sometimes misfiled, oftentimes missing completely. Bobby would chuckle and grin when I was embarrassed in front of a client. I knew it was him, but I had no proof. Eventually, I was called into a meeting with the partners, and Howard demanded to know what was going on. I tried to explain the alienation I was feeling, the snickering and the panties on my desk. I related how my files went missing or on some occasions had been rewritten with mistakes I would have never missed. In less than 2 months I had gone from a star to a stuttering, tongue-tied embarrassment. I had thought I had overcome the trauma that my mother had inflicted on me, but here it was again. I felt like I was back there, tied to the flagpole. And apparently, I was. During the meeting, Howard's computer dinged with an incoming email. Thinking it might be important to a current case, he opened it. A shocked expression appeared on his face. I could tell he was scrolling through several images. "I think I know what this is about, Hack. You still have friends among the associates, and one has forwarded to me some emails that were sent to all the associates except you." With that, he swung the laptop around so I could see the gallery of photos he'd been looking at. They go back a couple of months. "Your friend should have sent this to me then." There I was with my Shirley Temple curls, taped to the flagpole. There were photos of me in those purple panties. There was picture after picture documenting my childhood, including what looked to be videos of my mother at the pulpit, sermonizing. The nightmare of my childhood, shared for all to see. I got up and walked out. Howard called to me, repeatedly, but I didn't stop or dare to return. I was too choked up to even stutter. I saw Bobby and some other associates laughing as I exited the offices. Maybe Bobby was the friend who forwarded the emails to Howard, if only to cement my humiliation in front of the partners. I sent my resignation into the firm that evening. Eva tried to talk me out of it, asking what I was going to do if I quit. Any law firm in town would probably be sent those photos by whoever sabotaged me at Jameson, Atkins, and Fisher. And she was happy at the college and didn't want to move to another town. Again, she told me that I had to man up. What she muttered as she turned away sounded like, "You limp dick." I opened my briefcase to get my thermos out to clean it, and to my surprise, several pairs of panties fell out, including one the same shade of purple as those in the photos. Eva looked at them and smirked. "I should have known," she said. "Gloria told me that they cut us out because you were hitting on Bobby. She said that you were probably a latent homosexual. That's probably why you can't keep it up anymore. So much for monogamy." She stormed off and slammed the bedroom door. That was the third night I slept on the couch. I couldn't believe that my wife of over 4 years would have these thoughts or believe that slander. I know that I had routinely failed to satisfy her, especially lately, but she had to know that I was hetero, with all the sex we had had during our time together. I felt alone, more so even than when I was a child. Without Eva, I was lost. My life had seemed perfect, but now it seemed like an illusion. As I went to sleep, I could hear the telltale sounds of Ernie bringing satisfaction to my bride. I woke up in the morning when Eva threw the panties in my face and told me I might as well wear them openly, since she knew I was changing into them daily. I was shocked and horrified that she would even think this. "I can't stand the frustration you're submitting me to." She pulled on her coat and gloves. I agreed to be monogamous, but it seems you don't want to be. I thought that monogamy also implied that I'd be having some sex. You've turned into a worthless limp deck. Maybe if I had a deck, that would excite you. Maybe I should introduce your ass to Ernie. She smirked at me again, then continued. You know, I targeted you in college. I mean, you've been an emancipated minor and had a lovely bank account. No family to interfere, no trust fund to block me. And the girls talked about how great in bed you were. I don't see it. Never have. You could be great the first couple of rounds, but you could never last long enough to bring me over the top. Well, at least I got my student loans and masters paid off. Our divorce settlement should cover my PhD. I'm going to be staying with Bobby and Gloria for a while we work this out. Eva turned and walked out. Turned out she had already packed and loaded her car. I sat there stunned as she peeled off down the street. But she loved me, I thought. I couldn't believe that she didn't. Howard showed up the next day. He refused to accept my resignation. I was family and he needed me in the firm. How can I even show my face? I asked. They all saw me like that. Take the resignation. I was so distracted by my missing Eva, I didn't stutter or lisp at all. Howard sat for a minute, looking at me. You know, when Will first told me about you, he described a child with an unbelievably horrid childhood. He described it as soul-crushing. He doubted that you would ever overcome those terrible experiences. But he was determined to help you and he was so proud of you, how well you recovered. He bragged about the strength of your being. He laughed fondly at a memory that occurred to him. He described you as Superman, a heroic figure. He called you his son. How proud he was. He stood up, preparing to leave. Your job's there for you. You're my nephew, but beyond that, you're the best associate we have, or you will be with a little more experience. Ed says he'll be in trouble without you, that you understand some of the cases better than he does. You know, the only thing that's changed is that more people know how you suffered as a child. That doesn't change what happened, and it damn sure shouldn't change the man you've become. Take your time, and work on your linguistic skills. Mona said to give her a call. He put down a slip of paper with a phone number on it and left. I didn't contact Mona. I didn't go back to work. I sat for 3 days in misery, waiting for Eva to return. Phone calls and emails went unanswered, not just to Eva, but to Gloria and Bobby as well. I was alone. Finally, the third evening after she left, I drove over to Bobby's house. I was determined to confront my wife. There were lights on in the house, but there was no answer to my knocking. Somebody had to be home. I headed around the side yard. Bobby's and Gloria's house was up on a hill, with their back deck and pool overlooking a valley. It offered them privacy most of us were denied. As I opened their back gate, I heard sounds of women moaning. I pulled out my phone and looked around the corner. There, on the deck was Eva, Bobby, and Gloria having sex. When Bobby began roaring, I knew he was inseminating my monogamous bride. The climaxes continued as I walked up behind Bobby and planted my size 10 boot between his legs. His new roar disturbed the ladies who looked up to see me follow up with several more kicks at the now prostrate lover. Don't hurt him, Eva cried, as both she and Gloria moved to place themselves between us. What the duck? I demanded. You're my wife. What happened to monogamy? She smirked at me. You gave that up when you went gay. Besides which, I lied. Eva gave me an evil smile. I took the college job because my friend Ernie is the coach there. We've been screwing since before we married. My toys modeled on his deck. She caressed Bobby's hair. And I found out that Gloria and Bobby together have no trouble satisfying me. Ernie can fill in at work. I'm not gay. That was just a lie Bobby's telling. I wasn't sure why the idea that I was gay was what upset me in Eva's tirade. Ernie, threw some things with the Garcias. I suddenly realized that I didn't care anymore. I switched off the phone I had recording in my hand. You know what, they can have you. I was proud that I neither stuttered nor lisped. I'll file tomorrow for a divorce, and I think Uncle Howard might have something to say about Bobby's employment after I file for adultery, naming these two as co-respondents. Ernie, as well, if I find any evidence against him. I looked at my former friend's wife. And Gloria works for a church. They might find this video unsettling as well, at least the adulterous lesbian part. Gloria blanched. Bobby just painfully moaned some more. The good news is, I'm unemployed. My investments predate our marriage. My inheritance from Will, including our house, is in the trust for me, precluding you, and the court is likely to give me some alimony, since you're the breadwinner in our marriage, now. I turned and left. I left by going through the house, figuring it was the shortest way out. As I passed by the open bedroom door, I saw the original Ernie standing proudly on the bedside table. I detoured and scooped him up. I had plans for him. This new set of humiliations had showed me what Howard had tried to tell me, what Will had seen in me. I had strength of character. I could let it all roll off my back and find a better way to live. That's what Will had taught me. I would let Howard know that I'd be back once my divorce was final. I wanted my wife to be the breadwinner in this marriage when we divorced. With my investments, I might not get alimony, but I could afford to try for it, just to torment Eva. And I'd do my damnedest to make sure that she was penniless when the divorce was final. When I got home, I'd close out our credit cards and make sure our accounts were drained. I planned to hound Bobby in court. I'd take the other side of any case he worked on, pro bono. I planned to humiliate him until no decent law firm would hire him. And Gloria. I think that luring her away from Bobby with the most beautiful women I can hire to act as her lovers, only to be dumped by them once her marriage was toast, would be a punishment for both the Garcias. Besides, I didn't have any hard feelings towards Gloria, except those that were sure to arise when I watched the video I'd taken. Gloria in the nude was really something to see. I sent my video to the cloud and went home to do two things. Introduce Ernie to my barback and find that paper with Mona's phone number. She was only 5 years older than I was. I think I needed another graduation ceremony. This could be fun. The door was opened by the most beautiful and delicate little girl Habakkuk had ever seen. She stared up at him with a visage of intense concentration. "May I help you, sir?" the little lady asked formally. Hack knelt down in front of her, bringing the mitre eye. "Possibly," Hack began. "Are you the lady of the house?" The girl gave him that look that all little girls seem to master young, one that said, "Are you nuts, mister?" before turning and yelling into the house, "Mom, some man's at the door." As Habakkuk stood up, the adult version of the little lady pulled the door fully open. "Can I help you?" she asked suspiciously. Hack had thought that Eva was beautiful, that Gloria was sexy. Here was a woman, he thought, that put a lie to both those thoughts. He realized that he was staring and tried to focus. "Are you Meredith Larkin?" said Hack as he offered his card to the lady. A look of panic widened the woman's eyes as she looked at the card. The words attorney at law seemed to leap up at her. She hesitantly replied in the affirmative. "What's this about?" she asked with trepidation. Habakkuk could feel the fear that was overtaking the woman and tried to be as reassuring as possible. "I'm not here to add to your problems," he told her. "In fact, I'm hoping that you will let me help you." He gave her his brightest smile. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. "Well, as you can see from my card, I'm an attorney. You're being sued by your former neighbor and tenant for adverse possession of your property. I'd like to represent you in that case." As she shook her head and began to close the door, Hack added, "Pro bono, of course." The closing door paused, and then reopened. "Why? Why would you do that?" Letting his smile beam, he responded, "That's a fair question, but a long answer. Maybe we could sit down while we discuss it, either in the house or out here on the porch." Still suspicious, Meredith agreed to sit on the porch, unbending enough to offer Hack a coffee, which he accepted. Once she had returned with the drinks, Hack launched into his story. The lead attorney on the plaintiff's side is a former friend, named Robert Garcia. I vowed to destroy him in court in every case he appears in or to which he is connected. That's really the long and short of it. "Why? Again, why would you do that? What's he done to you?" Meredith wondered how honest a vengeful man would be. Habakkuk sat quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I can understand your suspicions, and I can tell that you're going to ask, why? Until I've told the whole story." He sipped his coffee. "Did you grow up around here?" he asked. When she replied that she had, he inquired, "Have you ever heard of Rita Mason, the feminist church?" Meredith's face lit up in recognition. "The castration revelations." She laughed. "Oh, God. I remembered that. That woman was nuts." Hack looked down. "She was my mother." Meredith's face fell. "Oh, God, I'm sorry." Hack mumbled that she wasn't as sorry as he was. "But wait," she questioned, "your card says your last name is Jameson, not Mason." "I adopted the name of the man who helped me escape the hell my mother raised me in. He was my social worker." Hack began his story, telling of the steps his mother had taken to save him from toxic masculinity, about how she viewed him as the spawn of Satan. "Your own mother?" Meredith whispered sympathetically. "How horrible." Hack led her through his life. The humiliations of childhood, the salvation afforded by Mr. Jameson, being an emancipated minor, college, Eva and his marriage. He left out the plastic and real Ernies. It was a bit much to tell a stranger. Law school while Eva got her master's. And the jealousy of Bobby and the destruction of his marriage. "And she never loved you," Meredith murmured thoughtfully. "So," Hack summed up, "I tried to raise above it. I'm not a violent man, but I can't be attacked and let it stand. So, I oppose Bobby in court, offering him the humiliation that will bother him the most. So far, he hasn't been in the courtroom, but when I find out he associated with the case, I make it my business to help the other side. I haven't won every time, but that's because I've basically been on the sidelines. The lawyers don't seem to like me butting in, even if it's to help. He shrugged. But this time he's going to court, and I've heard that you haven't gotten a lawyer yet. Why is that? He looked at the woman, seeing a sadness settle on her face. Money. Why else? She picked up a napkin she brought out with the coffee and dabbed her eyes. When my husband died, we had more debt than savings, and working 2 jobs, I just make enough to keep up with the bills. I can't afford a lawyer. Here the woman broke down and sobbed openly, the frustrations of the last year overwhelming her. The little girl, who had been listening through the window, threw open the door and ran into her mother's arms, hugging her fiercely. Habakkuk silently vowed to save this woman and child, whatever it took. The divorce had been finalized in the last month. Habakkuk had held off his revenge until the divorce and the financial decisions had been made. As he suspected, his trust and investments made the court deny him spousal support, even though he was unemployed and his wife still had her job. But the tape of his wife sneering as she told him how she had targeted him in college for his money, had him pay for her education, including student loans, and planned to fund her PhD when she raped him in divorce court, convinced the judge that what they had come into the marriage with was what they should take out of it. His investments remained his. Eva was as penniless now as she had been in college, although she retained her retirement from the school district. Hack had no claims on her income or benefits. On the other hand, she had no claims on his house, so she continued to live with the Garcias. She bragged about how good the sex was in every face-to-face meeting they had with their lawyers. She also let Hack know that she was even bringing the real human Ernie home, since Hack had destroyed her plastic Ernie dildo. That actually pleased Hack, since she had made the mistake of bringing him in before the divorce papers were actually filed, allowing Hack's pie to gather evidence. The divorce filing was amended to include Ernest Johnson as one of the adulterous partners. The only revenge that he had begun was against his old pal Bobby. Robert Garcia had been fired immediately from Jameson, Atkins, and Fisher once it was determined that he was the source of the emails, outing Hack and his childhood traumas. He had finally been hired as a junior associate by an ambulance chasing firm, Stiller and Myers. Hack, still technically unemployed, although he had helped Ed Fisher with some of the criminal cases, behind the scenes and unpaid, offered his service pro bono to the companies being sued by Stiller and Myers, if Bobby was assigned to the case. The clerk at the firm was willing, for a fee, to keep Hack appraised of Garcia's workload. While Hack was working alone, Howard Jameson was happy to offer Hack the services his firm could offer in support. That help was considerable. Hack had succeeded in successfully defending the companies in all the cases he became involved in. 2 companies rejected his offer, and several more times he was rejected by the company's law firm, even though his services would have been free. When Stiller and Myers finally realized that Hack Jameson had been instrumental in their defeats, they had approached him with an offer of employment. He had laughed and rejected their first, and all subsequent, offers. When they learned that he was acting as an unpaid agent, they finally questioned why. While learning that they were being targeted because of Garcia, they made an offer he accepted. He wouldn't work unpaid against them if they released Bobby from their employment. He did reserve the right to go against them with any paying clients. One of the law firms that had twice refused his assistance was Strum & Deutsch. Subsequently, they lost both cases, each with not only enormous judgments, but added punitive damages. The companies, each of whom had wanted to accept Habakkuk's offer but had given in to the law firm's refusal, had each subsequently fired Strum & Deutsch. The law firm blamed their dismissal on Hack, and were only too happy to hire Garcia. Unlike Stiller and Myers, S&D were a highly professional and well-respected group of lawyers. Their clients were huge firms who paid 6- and 7-figure retainer fees every year, above the actual cost of S&D's legal services. Still, the loss of a client stung, and they looked forward to humiliating Hack in court as punishment. Garcia was relegated to the position of paralegal, while the powers that be looked for a case that wouldn't endanger their large accounts. The case against Meredith Larkin fit the bill perfectly. The client wasn't one of their corporate clients, but instead was the cousin of one of the senior partners. The case was being done as a favor to the cousin, who was trying to acquire Meredith's property for herself. Bobby was overjoyed to be finally assigned a case, and as led to boot. Finally, he would be able to show his bosses what a great lawyer he could be. His confidence waned when 2 junior partners were added as associate counsel, and it soon became clear that Garcia was only lead on paper. Lawyer Garcia was put out. It had been fun, at first, when Bobby and she were taking Eva to bed, and she had even looked forward to Ernie joining the fun. But the reality soon became apparent. Bobby and Ernie were ducking Eva, and if she was lucky, they let her clean up the mess when they were done. Sure, they'd give her a toss occasionally, but Eva was clearly the main event. Gloria was in second place in her own home. Second place was an unfamiliar experience for her. Each night a resentment built. So, on several Friday nights, she had made the excuse that she was going out with some girls from work, and then would head to Sapfo's, her favorite lesbian bar. To hell with men. That night, she downed her first shot of tequila quickly, then signaled the barkeeper while scanning the room. She was surprised to see a familiar face, one that lit up when they locked their eyes. It was Regina, one of her junior class students from 2 years ago. Regina smiled broadly, coming up to Gloria. "Mrs. Garcia. My favorite teacher." Regina planted a wet kiss on Gloria's cheek. Gloria remembered Regina well, the girl lose sexuality. Gloria had had dreams about the girl. She hadn't known that she swung in Gloria's direction. "Call me Gloria, Regina. You're not my student anymore." Gloria patted the stool beside her, and Regina happily plopped her delicious ass down. "Gloria, I've got to tell you, I've always had the biggest crush on you. You were the sexiest teacher at St. Boniface." She laughed. Of course, the competition wasn't much, considering how many teachers were dried up old nuns. Gloria ran her finger down Regina's cheeks and over her lips. "Do you still have that crush? You're 18 now, aren't you?" she asked huskily, lust pumping through her veins. "Dreams do come true." "My sister's out tonight. We have the house to ourselves." Regina tilted her head and raised her eyebrows with the unspoken question. "Let's go." Gloria didn't have to think twice. Their affair lasted exactly 2 Fridays. The second week, Gloria went directly to Regina's house and was soon doing the horizontal tango with the young woman. Right as they reached their peaks, the bedroom door swung open, revealing Regina's sister Ronnie and the camera in her hand. Gloria jumped up, pulling the sheet off the bed to cover herself. "Stop that filming. You've got to erase that now," she demanded. Ronnie laughed and said, "Sure, no sweat. I wasn't really filming. I'm just talking with you." She looked appraisingly at the teacher. "But Mrs. Garcia, you look good enough to eat. How about making this a sister act?" Gloria smiled and dropped the sheet. Ronnie was a different ball of wax, a much more exciting version than her sister. Tattoos and piercings adorned the body of the woman that was rumored to be the head of the Twisted Sisters, a lesbian motorcycle gang. This would be a whole new experience. Going back to the present, when Ralph died, Meredith began, "I was a wreck. It was just Ruby and I, kissing the girl on her lap as she related her story to Hack. Ralph had no family, and neither did I. And he had handled all the bills and savings. I'm hopeless at those things. So, when Martha, my neighbor, came over to help, I thought she was a lifesaver. Ruby wasn't even 1 year old at the time, and I was overwhelmed. Ralph had been proud to have me as a homemaker. I'd never worked outside the house, so, raising Ruby and making a home for my family was to be my only job. But when Ralph's cancer manifested and suddenly, she stopped and hugged Ruby as another sob escaped, suddenly, Ralph was gone. And so was our income. I thought he had a life insurance policy, but I could never find it. Martha seemed so helpful. She straightened out my mail, babysat Ruby while I went to work, first at McDuffie's Burgers, then to a second job at Prosecco, just to earn enough money to keep the roof over our head and food on the table. The real problems started when Martha suggested that she move in, that it would be easier to take care of Ruby without having to go back and forth between houses. When I worked night stocking at Prosecco, she could go to sleep in the guest room. It seemed to make sense, and she was being so helpful, I agreed. We actually became a family, I thought. Then, when the tax bill came, she paid it before I even saw it. She said that she knew I didn't have the ready cash. I was just starting to work, so it took several months for me to earn enough extra cash to pay her back. I even had to sell some of my jewelry to raise enough money. Then she asked for it in cash. She said it would save her a trip to the bank. She laughed ruefully. Save her a trip to the bank? What bullshit. Let me guess, Hack interrupted. Good old Martha is living here and paying the taxes. She probably worked away to pay them the next few years as well, didn't she? Just saving you the trouble. And you paid her back in cash. Meredith nodded sadly. The lawyer looked at Ruby. You're a big girl, aren't you, sweetie? Let me guess, I bet you're 5, aren't you? The little girl smiled proudly and nodded. 5 years. Martha's claiming adverse possession, isn't she? She's lived here and paid the taxes for 5 years, and you never objected. He shook his head. I never had a chance to object. I was out working all day and she got the mail. The first I would hear of the taxes was when Martha would ask me to reimburse her. She wiped her eyes. I thought we were a family. She had been so helpful. I never realized that she moved in with me because she rented next door. She moved in to save that rent money, but I was grateful that she was so helpful with Ruby. It felt like a fair exchange. Well, California has a 5-year period before you can claim adverse possession. Martha obviously knew that and targeted you. The challenge will be proving that you repaid her for the taxes. It's undeniable that she's resided here for those 5 years, and I'm sure she has checks to show she paid the taxes. She nodded. He continued, and she arranged that you have no way to show that you paid her back. Cash usually leaves no traces. Hopefully, she made a mistake and deposited your cash into her account. If we can subpoena her bank records, we'll have a case. Without that, it's going to be tough. Meredith sniffled. I don't know what I'm going to do. I managed to get Martha out of the house, but I can't afford to change the locks, and she still has her keys. And I can't go to work. I have nowhere to leave Ruby. He pulled out his phone as he smiled at the distressed woman. We can fix all that. As he called a locksmith, she objected, saying that she couldn't allow him to do that she wouldn't be able to pay him back. He held up his hand to stop her objections, while he gave instructions to the locksmith, who promised to come right out. When he hung up, he told her that she didn't have to pay him back, that he just wanted her to be safe. When she still objected, he thought he understood. Look, people helped me. People who didn't have to help me, paid for things, and his eyes stared at the memories, one very special man left me his estate. Believe me, this is no problem. And if you think I'm another Martha, looking to take advantage of you somehow, I'm happy to write up an agreement that will state, 1. I'm taking your case pro bono, with all costs and expenses being solely on me, and 2. Your safety and Ruby's are considered an important part of the case, and so, will be insured at my sole cost. He smiled as he called up Rosa, who had been his paralegal at JA&F. She was a mid-50s Hispanic woman who had 8 children, the youngest only 10. I explained Meredith's childcare problems and asked how she handled hers. 15 minutes later, the agency she used had promised to send over several potential sitters over the next day for Meredith's approval. Meredith was weeping now, in frustration, saying she couldn't pay for this. Okay, offered Hack. I'll tell you what. We'll countersue Martha and you can pay me back from the proceeds when we win. What if we don't? She asked. That's my worry, not yours. I'm happy, you'll be able to return to work and Ruby will be cared for. Isn't that what we're hoping for? The argument was tabled by the arrival of the locksmith. 2 hours later, the locks were all changed, and Hack took his leave with the locksmith, promising to return for the childcare interviews. If you're wondering about Hack's cheating wife, well, Eva and Ernie found themselves out of a job as pictures of their relationship, and that of Eva's and the Garcias were provided to the school board. The photos Hack's pie had obtained with a camera hidden in the classroom supply closet of the pair ducking at work were enough. The other photos turned out to be gratuitously overkill. However, the male board members appreciated the overkill. Gloria was glorious as was Eva, as secretly did a few of the female members. When Eva was informed that the reasons for her dismissal would be included in any recommendation package the school was asked to provide, she realized her career in education, which she had enjoyed, was probably over. On top of that, she would never be able to afford her PhD. Ernie, the idiot, tried to console her by suggesting they retire to his house for some one-on-one comforting. As she angrily pushed Ernie away, she cursed him and told him they were through, that she never wanted to see him again. She also cursed her ex-husband and vowed vengeance. It was bad enough that she had lost everything in her divorce, had lost the lifestyle that her husband's wealth had provided. She was aware that she had provided her husband with the ammunition he needed when she stupidly revealed that she had used him, had married him, solely for her financial advantage. But still, the asshole didn't have to be so vindictive. Thank God the Garcias were still willing to provide her shelter. She didn't have enough money for her own place. She wondered how she could cement her relationship with Bobby. He finally gotten a job with a great law firm, not like that ambulance chaser firm Hack had gotten him fired from. Again, he didn't have to be so damn vindictive. But now that Bobby was with an even better firm than Jameson, Atkins and Fisher, maybe he could finance her PhD. Then Eva could find a college to work at. She would just not mention teaching at the high school, and never have to ask for a recommendation. Hack stopped Gloria in the parking lot as she was leaving school. She almost ran back inside when she saw him, knowing how he had gone after his wife and her husband. She dreaded what he would do to her. He had threatened her job the night he had caught them all but hadn't yet followed through. Hey Gloria. I've got a film to show you. Hack held up an iPad. It shows you making love to one of your students. An underage student. That never happened. I wouldn't do that. Gloria hissed, looking around to see if anyone was near enough to hear. No one was. Oh, yeah. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's watch the video. He hit play. The picture started up in the living room of Regina's and Ronnie's house. As the camera started up, it flashed across the newspaper on the table. A TV news program was playing on the TV in the background. The camera moved through the house, noises of sexual play clearly heard over the TV. As the door to the bedroom opened, there was Regina and Gloria cavorting on the bed. Gloria jumped up, pulling the sheets around her, demanding that the camera be turned off and the video erased. The film stopped. Gloria smiled smugly. She is not my student anymore, and she's not underage. No. This video's over 2 years old, and Regina wasn't even 16 yet. Hack insisted. No. That was last week, and Regina's over 18 and not a student. Gloria panicked, forgetting to keep her voice down. I think maybe you should watch the video more closely. The newspaper on the counter. From a day 2 years ago. The newscast on the TV. From that same day. And Regina and Ronnie will both testify it was 2 years ago. Hack scat and shook his head. Did you see any tattoos on Regina's body? She's gotten several in the last year. None of them were showing in the video. She must have covered them. She must have. Gloria was panting now with a growing fear. You know, not only will this get you fired and banned from teaching, but the lawyer shook his head again, regretfully. The police and the DA take cases of teacher-student liaisons very seriously. The student part isn't too bad. In the last case, the teacher only got a 180-day sentence. But the statutory part of your crime, that's easily good for 2 to 20 years. And you'd be a convicted sex felon forever. No, it didn't happen. You can't use that tape. Gloria pleaded. Oh, yes I can. He stated as he smiled smugly. Of course, I would if you were willing to work with me. As Gloria agreed to anything she insisted, he looked over her body. He watched the video of her, his wife and Bobby several times, and she was a sight to behold. Before his plans for vengeance, he intended to enjoy some sessions with this witch. He had had several graduation ceremonies with Mona right after his marriage had fallen apart, but Mona had since fallen for a kindred spirit and got married. It had been a long spell since then, and Hack could think of several things he wanted to do with Gloria. Then there was his vengeance against Bobby and his wife to consider. And he wanted to give his pie reward. And maybe a few other people who Gloria might not like so much, but Hack could insist on. And there were the sisters. Hack called Ronnie to tell her how well everything had worked out, and to thank her and Regina again for their help. Ronnie brushed off his thanks. Hey, dude, you bailed the Twisted Sisters out several times, all pro bono. We were happy to help you out. Hack made a mental note to add the sisters to the list of favors Gloria was going to have to provide. Bobby assured Martha that they had a lock on the case. They could prove beyond a doubt that Martha had resided for more than 5 years in the house and had paid the property taxes on her own and without objection from Meredith Larkin for those 5 years. It was open and shut. So strong was their case that the 2 junior partners had stepped back from the case, telling Bobby that they were sure that even he couldn't screw it up. Bobby didn't mention that sentiment to Martha as they smugly smiled at each other. Discovery had allowed Hack's forensic accountant to examine her bank accounts, which clearly showed the taxes being paid out, but there were no deposits restoring that money to Martha's accounts. Hack was stumped. The facts seemed to line up against Meredith. Hack believed her version of events, but was at a loss of how to prove the truth to the court. It was his pie who saved the day. He was so appreciative of the weekly gift that Hack had bestowed upon him, the weekly gift of the glorious Gloria, that he spent time and money to illegally bug Robert's office and the apartment that Martha had moved into. Lo and behold, when pressed by Bobby, Martha admitted to having a secret investment account where the tax reimbursements had been deposited. Hack would be able to get access to that hidden account. It would also be harmful to Martha's case when the judge found out that she and her counsel had hidden the account. Hack would have to find a legal way of discovering the account where Garcia's knowledge of it could be established. But a bonus occurred during Martha's meeting with Bobby. She stated that Ralph Larkin had had an insurance policy with XYZ Insurance Company, which Meredith had never cashed in. Martha had all the correspondence from the insurance company, and wanted Bobby to find a way she could make a claim on it. To her disappointment, Bobby failed to think of any scenario where Martha could make a claim on her then neighbor's life insurance. But as Meredith's lawyer, Hack contacted XYZ that day, establishing that Ralph had had a $2 million policy, which he had established before his marriage. XYZ confirmed that the premiums had been paid until 5 years ago, when the premiums began being deducted from the cash value of the policy. They informed Hack that the cash value would be depleted before year's end, and then the policy would lapse. But we've informed Mr. Larkin by correspondence of all this. Why are you asking? The representative queried. Hack informed them that Ralph had died 5 years previously, and that the account had been illegally hidden from the widow. When the company representative objected, the lawyer assured them that he didn't suspect and wouldn't accuse the insurance company of any wrongdoing. Quite the opposite, he was sure that they had acted honorably, and the illegalities had been done by a third party. However, he informed the representative that Meredith would be making a claim based on her husband's death 5 years prior. Next, he called Rosa and asked her to call several banks and investment firms to find out if Martha had any accounts with them. The list he sent Rosa included the firm Martha had revealed to Bobby. When Rosa reported that Martha had accounts not only at that investment firm, but at another bank as well, Hack was able to get a warrant for the records of those accounts from an unsurprisingly pissed-off judge. When they presented the accounts to the judge, there were cash deposits which matched the taxes that had been paid. Hack also presented the judge with the copies of all the correspondence the insurance company had sent to Meredith, which she had never received. Based on the assurance that Martha had handled all the mail, the judge issued a search warrant and instructed the police to execute it on Martha's apartment. They were able to recover the insurance correspondence that Martha had saved in the greedy hope that she would somehow be able to collect on the policy. They also discovered the notices from the state, showing that Martha had filed for adverse possession and had hidden it from Meredith. The judge referred the evidence to the DA, recommending fraud charges be initiated against Martha. When the court imposed fines against Martha for withholding information about her investment and bank account from Discovery, Bobby argued that the accounts were merely overlooked because Martha had assured Bobby that the accounts were unrelated to her case. Hack shook his head at how stupid Bobby was. He then drew out from Bobby a full admission that he had known about the accounts, but insisted again that they were unrelated to the case. The judge didn't think so. He referred Bobby and his firm, Strum & Deutsch, to the Bar Association. The judge noted that 2 junior partners in the firm were listed as associates in this case. Eventually, the Bar Association would sanction the firm, but would disbar Robert Garcia for willful malfeasance. Before disbarment, Bobby was surprised by a divorce petition from his wife, stating adultery with Eva and Ernie as her reasons. Her lawyer, Habakkuk Jameson. While Garcia argued that there was no adultery, that Gloria and he had an open marriage, Hack countered that the marriage was open to participants with both partners engaged. His pie, and secretly Gloria's albeit unwelcome lover, had managed to place several cameras in their house, with Gloria's permission, where not only were Ernie and Eva captured having sex with Bobby without Gloria's participation, but were captured talking about Bobby replacing Gloria with Eva. While Bobby had been intrigued, he had never agreed, but the recordings confirmed that the 3 were engaged in activities without Gloria. Garcia's courtroom manner deteriorated during the proceedings, in which he insisted on representing himself. By the end, his arguments would have been best described as whining, much to the irritation of the judge. That irritation showed in his decisions. At the end of the proceedings, Hack was able to garner 60% of their net worth for Gloria, as well as residence in their house for the next 5 years, after which Gloria had the option of buying out her husband or selling the house. Gloria would be entitled to 60% of any profit. During those 5 years, Bobby would still be responsible for 50% of the household costs, including the mortgage. Should he fail to make those payments, they would be deducted from his 40% of the property, including interest. Hack felt that his revenge against Robert Garcia had been accomplished, especially when the order for disbarment was delivered the following week. Hack had some fun with Gloria, but found that sex without love was hollow, and sex fueled by hate was depressing in the end. Although Gloria's end was nice and tight. He gave Gloria outright to the pie, who, fat, bald and 50, couldn't believe his luck. He had never had a lover half as gorgeous as Gloria. Under threat of having criminal charges filed, Gloria agreed to a 6-month sentence, during which time the pie owned her from 5 o'clock every Saturday until 12 noon on Sunday. Gloria figured 26 sessions of abuse with a smelly man was better than years in prison. It was during the 5th weekend that the pie introduced Gloria to his friends. When Gloria's divorce decree was finalized, Eva found herself out on her ask. She had rejected Ernie when they had been fired, and now, when she came hand in hand, he had jumped her bones. After painfully pounding her holes overnight, Ernie had then laughed and had thrown her out of his house. She began bed surfing, staying with acquaintances who had dreamed of ducking her for years, but who would soon tire of the bitter witch who ducked well, but was unbelievably demanding outside the bedroom. She rarely lasted a month in the same bed. With no money in the bank and teaching denied her, Eva applied and was accepted in a management training program for a retail company. Eva hated the idea, the position obviously beneath her. But as she was running out of lovers who would offer her even temporary shelter, she needed the job to pay for an apartment that made her college abodes seem like mansions. Again, she cursed her husband for driving her to such depths. It was Hack's fault. It was, she told herself. As she drowned her sorrows in the cheapest whiskey that the dingy neighborhood bar had to offer, the seat next to her was suddenly filled with a large bearded man. How about a quick screw for $250? Ready to attack the man for his disrespect, it suddenly struck her that $250 was more than her take-home pay for 2 days' work. She appraised the man. How bad could it be? She hadn't gotten laid for several days. It could solve a lot of problems. She smiled back at the man. When Hack brought the paperwork from XYZ for Meredith to fill out, she collapsed on the couch, sobbing. Hack and Ruby rushed to comfort her. Hack gathered her to his chest and comforted her, as both Ruby and he tell her that she was okay, that it was a good thing. Meredith sat up, finding herself in Hack's lap as she panted and finally managed to get out, $2 million. $2 million. She hugged Ruby to her and pulled them both into Hack's chest. I was so afraid. I had nothing, how could I take care of Ruby? We were so lost. She lay her head back against his chest, sitting quietly for several minutes. Then she threw her hands around Hack's neck and passionately kissed him. You are a hero, she whispered. It was a year later that Ruby was the flower girl and Rose the matron of honor. Hack stood proudly as the vision that was Meredith floated down the aisle on the arm of his uncle, Howard Jameson. He knew this was a woman who loved him. This was a woman that he was able to satisfy in bed, a woman who could raise the dead with her sexuality. God knows she raised him for not just a second round, but quite often a third. His smile grew broader as he thought about the pleasure this woman brought to him. They were getting married just in time. Soon it would be obvious to everyone that Ruby would soon be a big sister. Thanks for joining me on this ride. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell to catch the next story. Take care and stay tuned for more tales right here at Sorry What. See you soon.